end of Obama and beyond. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with introductions because I think all of you who are here are aware of the background of our panelists. Starting in this direction, we have Paul Street, who's a noted journalist and author. We have Professor Anthony Monteiro, who is from Temple University, the African American History Department. Studies Department, not history, but Studies Department. Glen, who is the executive editor of Black Agenda Report. Margaret, who is a senior columnist and editor of Black Agenda Report. And Bruce Dixon, who's from Georgia, he's all the way up here, who is the managing editor of Black Agenda Report. I want to start off very briefly in talking about Black politics at the tail end of Obama and beyond, is that all of the folks who are on this panel this morning had an understanding of who Barack Obama was when he first hit the scene. So there was no confusion in terms of Obama being anything other than a representative and a leader of U.S. imperialism. That was very true. Historic moment aside. That is what we're faced with, and the reality of that has been clearly demonstrated in the first term of his office. So yesterday, and I just want to be very brief about this, I attended a panel discussion, I would say, and I'm not trying to be unkind nor provocative, of Obama apologists. Because they have a problem. Because history has been recorded in those first 4 years. That's history. And he will be judged, this president will be judged accordingly. Now, one of the panelists said, and this is a noted Black spokesperson and a lead or a prominent Obama supporter, a keeper of the legacy, if you will, who said, well, you know, I'll use my mother as the best example because she got her back against the wall when people started to criticize Obama the man. Now, I don't know, I haven't heard anyone talk about an unflattering suit he had or a haircut, or I haven't heard anything other than this brilliant orator, this brilliant politician. So where this revisionist history is coming from, one does not know. But we can expect as time progresses and we see clearly his move to the right even more so than now, that these Obama apologists and revisionists are going to come out with stories to cover their tracks, so to speak. So anyway, I just wanted to tell you that so we'll get a clear lay of the political land and landscape here in terms of who will be talking today. No apologists here. My name, of course, not of course, but rather is Nellie Bailey. I worked in Harlem for a long time. I co-host Black Agenda Radio with Glen. And again, we welcome all of you. And we're going to start because we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. And in this order, Glen will be first. Then we'll go to Professor Monteiro, then Margaret Kimberley, and then Paul Street, and Bruce Dixon will be our last speaker. And after that, we ask that you hold your comments and your questions. We will open the floor up, and hopefully we will have a lively discussion. Okay, so we'll start with Glen Ford.
Good morning, power to the people. We, of course, are coming to the tail end of Obama's presidency. I like it better every day as his term gets shorter every day. And in this second term, we see that he is a lame duck, of course, and among masses of black folks, it is dawning on them that this Obama will not be with us forever. And so there sets in a willingness, finally, to evaluate what has actually happened during this age of Obama, because people are anticipating that it will be gone only 3 years from now. And we also see that some segments of what we at Black Agenda Report like to call the Black misleadership class are revising their own histories during this age of Obama. All of a sudden they are positioning themselves as having been constructively critical of Obama during this period, when in fact none of that happened. And a few of them are even uttering that forbidden word, demands. We demand jobs of this president, or we demand that you listen to us at least. Those are minimum expectations, but some are at least mouthing the words because they understand that they're going to have to answer for, well, what did you do in the war, Daddy, or what did you do during the Obama phenomenon? We usually talk about the destruction that's occurred in Black America under the Obama presidency, the destruction that he's overseen. And it has been horrific. By many indices, black folks in a very, very, very short space of time have lost as much as 2 generations in terms of progress. Now, on one hand, that shows that we really haven't made that much progress in 2 generations, or else it could not be so quickly lost. But to return to 1960s levels of poverty and to descend below any historical measurement in the 20th century in terms of black wealth. Those are very, very dramatic. And the deterioration of the black condition has not just been more of the same, which is more of a worse situation, but it has been at an accelerated rate compared to other folks, because our position was always so precarious anyway. We could spend a whole presentation just listing the various ways in which the actual objective black condition in the United States has declined. And we could attach Obama's name to that phenomenon, and it's convenient to do that. But actually, of course, that was capitalism, and Obama was just the guy in charge doing the capitalists' bidding at the time. And if it had been Hillary Clinton, the policies would not have been any different. The black reaction to those policies would, I am sure, have been quite different. And so as this Obama tenure peters out, we'll see some of his defenders, and this is in an ironic way, maybe a good thing. Some of his defenders will increasingly take the position in hopes of putting a good light on his legacy, which they identify as being somehow a black legacy, take the position that it was not Obama's fault, that these undeniable by the numbers, this catastrophe was not his fault, it was the fault of capitalism. And I guess that's a good place to have a conversation if that's where the best place we can go. If they're going to blame the 1% for putting Obama in such an embarrassing position and embarrassing the race thereby, I suppose that's something we can work with. And it would be maybe an improvement in the conversation. But we can't escape the fact that it is the absolute passivity of the black polity in the face of this destruction, and that has been so alarming. And we can't paper over that. Wall Street didn't make black people delirious with Obamaism. Wall Street couldn't do that. They created the conditions that led to the destruction, but they could not make black people feel good about going to hell. That's not in their capacity. Wall Street didn't blind black people to the fact that Obama was already demonstrably the most right-wing of the three Democratic candidates left standing in the primaries. That in some cases, in the case of housing, he was to the right of Hillary Clinton. Wall Street didn't put blinders on black people's eyes. That was something that was internal. Wall Street didn't convince black folks back in 2010 when Pew Research folks did a poll. Wall Street didn't convince black people that they were better off in 2010 than they were 10 years before, even though exactly the opposite was true. 1999 and 2000 were the best years on record for black folks in terms of earnings on the white dollar. That is, blacks proportionately made a bigger fraction of the white dollar than ever before. But Wall Street had nothing to do with that. This blindness and this delirium, this drug-like state that black America was in was not induced by Wall Street. And no other group in the country was suffering from this delirium, according to the Pew poll and other polls that followed up on their observation. Every other ethnic demographic in the country understood that not only was the country in trouble, but their group was in trouble, and they were in trouble. Only black folks thought that they were doing better than they ever had before. And black people were in the worst shape of all, had been hardest hit. We at Black Agenda Report call that the Obama effect, but the effect could have had any black president's name on it. It was not distinctly signature Obama. It was an effect that occurred because of the presence of a black person in the White House. And that's because black people historically believe that they are doing well, that there is progress being made based largely on the presence of black faces in high places, blacks who are in prominent positions. That has historically been the signal to us that things are getting better. And in previous eras, it was a good signal. It was rather reliable. Black faces in high places and black progress have been almost synonymous in people's minds, so that we think that we're doing great even if we ain't. Now I know that lots of people, lots of white people, will say that, well, you know, white progressives were also fooled by this Obama person. But number one, white progressives are a small fraction of white people. And so that is not indicative of white folks. I wish it were, but it's not. And in black America, this was a mass phenomenon. And white progressives, at least for the past 50 years, have taken many of their political cues from black folks. So that when black people become passive, or much less deluded, then these white folks who take their cues from black people are just at a loss about where to go and what to do. If this age of Obama has taught us anything, it is that the politics of placing black faces in high places can be our undoing, that this has turned into its opposite. Because we have now entered an age, we've been there for some time now, when the corporate rulers have no problem with recruiting and showcasing black political mercenaries to do their bidding. So our old indicators are useless to us, and in fact they can be used against us, and the Obama phenomenon is just the most dramatic example. We at Black Agenda Report have put a great deal of the blame for the black political catastrophe on the black misleadership class, and they deserve to share a great deal of that blame. That class has historically been drawn from the most grasping segments of black America, people who identify their own class interests as being identical to the interests of masses of black people. And in fact, they substitute for the interests of black folks. But the fact is, and we can't paper over this either, the fact is that black folks have followed those black misleaders. They have responded to that language, and that concept of black faces being in high places signifies progress. Help me get somewhere and I'll bring the rest of the race with me, you know, just trust us. So putting the blame on this small fraction of aspiring and corrupt people that we call the black misleadership class doesn't really answer the problem. What is at root here is the black imperative for unity. This is something that is fundamental to the black polity. It's been our salvation here in the United States. It's the Black Saga is an amazing story of people who at some points in history made up a little less than 10% of the population, surrounded by almost universal white hostility, and yet developing a political coherence that frankly was envied by most of the rest of the African diaspora because of our political coherence, because of our unity. That's been our saving characteristic. In this tail end of Obama, that is from now on, I think that it's vitally important that we concentrate on the internal struggles within the black nation. And we have not done that consistently because of that imperative to unity. Sometimes it's expressed as not airing dirty linen in public, which is another way of saying don't let the white people see you arguing with each other. But more fundamentally, that comes from the imperative to unity. So we paper over contradictions. And sometimes that didn't do us a great deal of harm, because in the previous eras of racial exclusion, the powers that be were so virulently racist that they didn't even utilize their own capacity for co-optation to the full. They just didn't want to associate with black people to the extent that they could conspire with them. But now times are different, and they are quite open to cultivating more Obamas and more Harold Fords and more people like the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Cory Booker. There's an endless supply of these people, and if we're not going to, on smaller scales, repeat the catastrophe, the black political catastrophe that we saw under Obama, we must get rid of that reticence to engage in internal, intra-black political battle. And I think the inspiration here can be found in Malcolm X. Malcolm X means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I think that Malcolm X's finest hour was when he did battle with the people he called the Big Six, and that was the NAACP and the SCLC and the Urban League, all of these established and now iconic black institutions. And he talked about them like a dog. He did withering criticism and in public. And when Malcolm did that, he made it acceptable and legitimate in terms of black political discourse for other folks to do so. And we saw in the wake of that a flowering of black political discussion and a flowering of black radicalism in the community because of that example that Malcolm set. So we need to follow Malcolm's example as we get through, as we work our way through this tail end of Obama and beyond, and take off the gloves and fight our enemies, our class enemies within the black community, and that includes some people who are in this building today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Nellie, for organizing this. We are in the throes of a great ideological struggle. Much of what Glen describes and points out about Pew polls and surveys showing black people apparently delusional, I put quotes around that, at least ideologically disoriented, is a manifestation of this great ideological struggle. It is an ideological struggle in the broadest sense of the word. I would suggest that black people are not tuned in to the large questions of this epoch. I would suggest, however, that we have not yet produced an intellectual and political and ideological vanguard that could lead in this moment. So we see this great confusion. But the ideological problem is anchored also in a poverty of the social sciences. To go beyond, and this is no slap at journalists, the normal journalistic description of this crisis. In other words, we lack a theory, a worldview that could help us not only understand the moment, but to take appropriate action to unite strategic and decisive social and class forces to alter and change the moment. We don't have that. What we have seen in what many people call a collapse of the black left, and I don't think that is accurate, what we have seen, assisted by the liberals and often conservatives in the black community, is the consolidation ideologically of a respectable black social democracy. What Nellie describes and what Barr pays great attention to is actually the rise of this social democratic group that have not constituted themselves as a party, but as an ideological movement that, quote, speaks for black progressives. Now, what is the architecture of the ideological construction of this black social democracy in the era of Obama? Well, it goes back to Du Bois and the problem of the 20th century being the problem of the color line. And I'd like to just indicate very quickly that it is not what most people thought it is. Oh, race is yes, race is the problem, but the problem for what? What was Du Bois saying race was the problem for in 1903? It is the problem for bourgeois democracy. This has great significance, both in the appropriation of the concept by the Social Democrats and the actual reality of where we are today as the crisis of race has deepened. First of all, Social Democrats have misappropriated the concept and, for example, have said or argued that the election of Obama, while not ending the crisis of race, was a progressive move in the direction of weakening race as the major problem of the American society and of bourgeois democracy. You know, a great example of this, of course, was Manning Marable's book on Malcolm X. And I prefer to understand the book from the last chapter, where he argues, in effect, and he said this in other places, and this is not ad hominem at all, because he was a friend of mine, but he was wrong, and he's a social democrat. He argued that Malcolm, had he lived, would have been a social democrat and would be supporting Barack Obama's administration. That's the argument of the book. Because Obama represented a progressive move on the part of black people in ending the historic problem of the color line. Now, of course, Manning also argued that the election of Obama represented a renaissance of democracy. No, he argued this. Others have argued this. For example, Amiri Baraka has made this argument. Again, not ad hominem. Bill Fletcher has made this argument and continues to make this argument.
Absolutely.
This argument is based upon a misunderstanding and misappropriation of Du Bois's concept of the color line. However, things are the exact opposite of what they claim. Not only has Obama's election not meant a lessening or weakening of racial oppression, we have seen its intensification and enlargement. Now back to Du Bois. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of race. If the problem of race does not abate but intensifies as it has in this first decade of the 21st century, it signifies a deepening crisis of bourgeois or liberal democracy. What is the answer to the crisis of bourgeois democracy on the part of the 1/10 of the 1%? Well, we see it around us every day. All we have to do is read the newspapers. An attack upon democracy, a deepening of racial oppression, mass incarceration, mass imprisonment, mass unemployment, mass poverty. We don't even have the social science to adequately analyze the crisis that affects the African American people. But I would prefer that we, for the moment, not talk just generally about the African American people, but about the African American proletariat. Because that's where the crisis is. 10-15% of African Americans are not experiencing the crisis that this mass of unemployed, underemployed, low paid, incarcerated young black people are experiencing. A society which has targeted them for the greatest hatred of everybody that is not them. So if you're not young, unemployed, uneducated, and poor, and maybe you're black, polls show that often they have the same utter contempt and hatred for the black poor. It is this group, see this class division, this ideological division, that is what is behind, along with finance capital, the Cory Bookers and the Michael Nutters, and the black agents of this 1%. I'd just like to end on this. This charade of right and left.
That's right.
The Tea Party is the right, Obama and the Democrats are the left. This is a charade.
Yeah.
What we have are the right, the far right, and the further right.
That's
the
right.
level of
That's
the
it.
elite.
Yeah.
And this is not, I mean, I think this is accurate. But what does this mean? The Obama administration, and this is the hard sell, but it is the necessary thing that we have to say, represents, as a political movement, the consolidation of counter-revolution. And what do we mean by counter-revolution? Well, there are many ways to talk about a counter-revolution. Usually we mean a counter-revolution against democracy, against the rights of unions to organize, against the right to have African American studies, against the right of kids to be educated, against the right, if you're black, to be with your friends and go to certain parts of Philadelphia, where I'm from, where the government has the right to accumulate data on every aspect of your life. When Du Bois talked about the problem of the 20th century and race, the crisis of civil liberties inevitably intersects with the crisis of race. You cannot be a civil libertarian without not at the same time being a passionate opponent of anti-black racism. And we must start with the centrality of the African American people. You cannot look at this structure of repression, be it the kill list, the dirty wars, the Verizon and everything we do being surveyed. You cannot look at this and call it anything but either crypto-fascism, open fascism, authoritarian right-wing rule. This is by no means a democracy that we live in. And that illusion has to be burst. I haven't been here except for today, and I'm certain as I look through what's being talked about, so much of what is being talked about here has nothing to do with the actual situation on the ground.
That's right.
And that tells you something about the academic and intellectual left. So many of them use this to bolster their resumes and take it to their department chairs to get tenure and promotion, and I spoke here and I spoke there. But they're not talking about the life worlds of the poor, of the oppressed, of the proletariat, and of the black proletariat. I think we've entered a period now where we have to think about ways of forming a new type of black left. Du Bois, after the failure of the talented 10th, talked about a guiding 100. That's no different than what Lenin or Marx or Gramsci or Ho Chi Minh or anybody else talked about. fewer better, but a better few. But we have to be ideologically and commit ourselves to ideological clarity. This is going to be a long struggle. We cannot expect that there won't be casualties, and there have already been millions of casualties. 2.5 million people in the penitentiary are casualties. In Philadelphia in 1 week, the police shot more than 7 young men, primarily African men, in the streets of Philadelphia and killed 2 of them in 1 week. So bad that the police commissioner had to call for a federal investigation, probably covering his own ass. But it is that bad. I'm certain it's the same thing in Chicago, the closing of schools, the control of the media, the politics of the big lie, lying about the economy. And as you know, the Wall Street bubble is going to burst in the not too distant future. And they do know that there's going to be another Great Depression. I don't know if we even came out of the one that started in 2007 to 2008. But there'll be another round of this. Europe is already experiencing it. China, India, and the other BRIC countries are experiencing it. So what we have to have, lastly, and I say this from the standpoint of the African American struggle for freedom, and I agree with Glen, the African American people and the African American proletariat will be the decisive fighting force in this next period. What we need, Bruce's trunk is kind of distracting me. Chill, man.
Go ahead, Tony. We'll take care.
I'll just end right here. We have to consider several things. One, the rebuilding of the left. The rebuilding of the black left, and that is ideologically and organizationally. Secondly, we have to talk about what we talked about a great deal in the past, the building of black united fronts at the grassroots level, be it on the question of mass incarceration, the question of Bradley Manning, the question of war, these dirty wars, the question of unemployment, the questions of the closing of schools. And I'm certain in every city of this country, these broad united fronts are forming that include the unions, the black community, the Latino community, women, unemployed youth, and so on and so forth. That has to go forward. The other thing in the ideological struggle, we have to hammer home to people that the electoral political process is not a vehicle for democracy. It, in fact, is a vehicle for the opposite of democracy. And that will be a large ideological struggle to win, because most people, given the history of the United States and given the history of black people having been denied the right to vote legally for so long, to say that the strategy, by the way, that goes, and I'm ending here, that goes back 40 years, where we said we moved from protest to politics. I don't know if many people remember, I know Nellie might. We moved,
Bayard Rustin.
Bayard Rustin, but others, from protest to politics, from the street to the legislative councils and the city halls. We now have to reverse that, from politics to protest.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
Good job.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony Monteiro, who is head of the African American Studies
No, I'm not. I just teach it.
of teaching the African American Studies Department at Temple University. I'm getting ahead of myself. We have a number of people who are here, and what we want everyone to do is to squeeze in a little bit so we can bring in some other chairs. So if you would just give us a second. Well, if you could squeeze back a little bit so we can get in a couple of more chairs. If we could just try.
They don't have to move. One chair here and 2 chairs over here. One chair.
Cam Africa needs a chair. Excuse me, Reverend, if you could just bring it over
like we can
They're
put it.
pointing to a chair.
Just one here. The chair here. Yeah, the chair over
Okay,
here.
oh, okay, all right, let's have a little order. Okay, let's see if we can get some more chairs in. We're going to do this very quickly and efficiently. Okay, so does everyone now have a seat?
Are there any?
Everyone has a seat?
Empty seat here.
Okay. Okay, here.
Okay.
You can just walk around. Sir, you can just walk
Yeah,
around.
I'm just waiting for it.
Okay.
Okay, are we all set?
You're all set.
Okay, everyone is comfortable. We want to once again thank Anthony, Dr. Anthony Monteiro, who teaches in the African American Studies Department at Temple University. And I would ask all of our speakers, as you come forward, if you could introduce yourself for the benefit of people who come in late, and I don't need to do it. So our panelists will proceed speaking in the manner in which we discussed previously, and the panelists will give you a brief introduction of themselves so we can move expeditiously through this. Margaret, you're next.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Margaret Kimberley, and I'm an editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report, very proudly. And I think this is a perfect time to start talking about the tail end of Obama. January 21st, 2017 is next Inauguration Day. And it should be celebrated as a day of jubilee for black people, a modern day Juneteenth, if you will, because it'll be the last day that Barack Obama will be president of the United States. Before Obama was even elected or heard of, black people spent decades debating whether or not they would ever see such a thing. Could a black person be elected? Would he be assassinated? Would it be a he or a she? Would it be a Republican or a Democrat? So you see, Obama took up mental space in the minds of black people before he was ever even thought of. And that means that his, his ascension, political ascension, was a bad thing. The years of his administration have been the low point of politics for black people. Black politics had been on life support for some time before 2008, but his election marked the day that the plug was finally pulled. Black politics were killed by many things, by COINTELPRO, by mass incarceration, by the power of money in politics. The Congressional Black Caucus went from being the conscience of the Congress to being like everybody else. So the supreme irony that the election of a black man meant the end of black politics can't be overstated. And the happiness of black people in seeing him can't be overstated either. There were huge increases in levels of voting participation for the goal of getting him into office. And there is no measurement, I think, of the happiness. I guess if you had a happiness meter, you could find out. So I think it's not an overstatement to say that many black people are actually addicted to Obama and to this sight they've seen that they never thought would happen. And we all know from personal relationships and anecdotes that there's nothing good about being in a relationship where one person has the advantage and the other has the disadvantage. You think of a battered wife or even a battered husband. And the relationship with Obama is along those lines. A lot of people are addicted to him and will need to go into a period of a recovery, if you will, once he leaves office. But that doesn't tell us much. It could be the happy ending of a reality show where the recovered addict comes home clean, or the sad story about the person who didn't even finish the program because they were afraid of change. And I'm being partly humorous, but it's the best model I can think of to describe this phenomenon. The damage done to the cognitive abilities of black people is immense and can't be undone by any typical means. This love defies logic for most of us sitting here, and his absence will be difficult to take. It's interesting about the Obama files. They're of two minds about him. Shows the weirdness of the relationship. When he has a political success, they sing his praises and speak endlessly of how smart he is and how high he will rank in the presidential pantheon. And on the other hand, when he does something indefensible, the genius suddenly becomes weak and hapless and unable to do what he really wanted to do because of those mean old Republicans. And by the way, success to these people just means Obama getting his way. It doesn't matter if what it is he's doing ends up hurting them or not. Republican unhappiness is reason enough to be happy. We're talking about the tail end of Obama, but there's something important to keep in mind. He has almost 4 years left. 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days. So it's a fair amount of time for him to do damage. In 4 years, he turned the political world on its head. Obamacare, for example, may be anathema to Republicans now, but it wasn't always so. It's essentially the same program that Nixon proposed 40 years ago. So it's now official. The Democrats of today are the Republicans of a few decades back. Obama has been praised by an odd group of people for a Democrat to be praised. People like William Crystal called him a born-again neocon, since the story of the NSA spying, which by the way is not news. If we had a better media, this would have been a news story several years ago. There's nothing new going on with that. But his absence will cause withdrawal symptoms from people who previously would never have had common cause with anybody like Bill Kristol. Before he became president, Social Security was the third rail of politics. Do you remember that expression? Untouchable to anybody who wanted to survive in elected office. It was the lowest hanging fruit for Democrats. But now the Republican dream of eviscerating the safety net has come true, and during a Democratic administration. It can be touched at any time. While Democrats spend their time obsessing over the latest racist and or asinine statement made by some Republican congressman whose name they didn't even know about until now. But that shouldn't be true of anybody who attends an event that's called the Left Forum. We should have been we at bar, and I'm assuming most of you have been speaking out about this man all along. Our goal should be to recreate black politics and all politics from a left perspective, which is not, I add, not the same thing as having black politicians in office. The joy of seeing the black commander-in-chief and first lady presiding over state dinners has come at a very high price for 30 million people. Senate candidate Obama made his first appearance to the majority of Americans when he spoke at the 2004 Democratic Convention before a primetime audience. He famously said, "There is no black America, there is no white America." The statement is obviously absurd, but it's also a lie meant to make him palatable to white voters. And therein lies the danger of wanting to see the black face in the high place. Of course there's a black America, and asserting that fact should be the essence of black politics and an undisputed fact for people who call themselves leftists. We will have a lot of work to do between now and January 2017. We have to continue our fight against the people who choose the presidents. They act against the interests of the masses of people on the planet, and the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue or 10 Downing Street or Elysee Palace must always be taken to task, or we're all in very great danger. These facts, which we here know and accept to be true, are not known by people who love to see Barack Obama, even when he goes on television to tell them that he isn't listening to their phone calls, when in fact he, of course, is doing just that. In 2017, we'll have to drag some people away, kicking and screaming away from their delusions. Some of them may see the light on their own, but too many of them will be wistful as they replay in their memories the moments of seeing Obama sworn into office, or meeting the Queen of England, or emerging from Air Force One, or dancing with the First Lady. They will be resistant to having their fantasies challenged. We'll be stuck with him for a long time, unfortunately, but his specter, like his physical being, shouldn't shut us up, not if we claim to be on the left. This is the left forum, not the Democratic Party forum. And one of Obama's means of escaping blames, for example, for the NSA PR disaster, is to say that Congress knew about it all along, which is true. We have a chance with his exit from office to point out that the Democrats, before and during the Obama administration, have been happy to throw us all under a bus. Perhaps the people who make good use of their stint in recovery will be able to see some of the light about the corrupt nature of the entire political system. His exit provides an opportunity to move the masses away from the Democratic Party and towards a discussion of alternatives. Perhaps seeing the rotten nature of our system will keep leftists from quaking in their boots when they are told they'll be spoilers if they vote green, or just dump the Democrats once and for all. The system needs to be spoiled, and perhaps Obama's exit will make that clear. I also want to add before I finish that there are some people who are not just drugged, hypnotized Obama bots. Some of them just don't have the language or the knowledge to talk about what they've experienced and what they're witnessing. They have a vague unease, or they speak about being disappointed in Obama. But that's where we can come in if we continue to speak boldly about the nature of our system. And the tail end of Obama will be a better day for everyone.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good job. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for all coming out. My name's Paul Street. I was the Director of Research at Chicago Urban League at 45th and Michigan Avenue for 5 years. I remember Obama from Springfield, from the south side of Chicago, going back to the mid-1990s. Pretty bourgeois job at Urban League. It's how I sent my kid to college. He graduated, I got out ASAP. I've been an independent author ever since. I wrote a book in 2008 called Barack Obama and the Future of American Politics.
All right.
Most of which was written in '07, and you know, I don't want to say I told you so, or, well, because folks here don't need to hear that. My I told you so came a couple years later in a book called The Empire's New Clothes, Barack Obama and the Real World of Power. I got a book coming out next December called They Rule. If anyone's interested, talk to me after I've got a flyer on that. Lately, I've been referring to the president as Barack under the bus Obama. And the list of those that Obama has thrown under the runaway buses of neoliberal capitalism, U.S. empire, white supremacy is quite daunting. His resume of betrayal includes his maternal grandmother, his preacher,
That's right.
that was early, the labor movement, betrayed and abandoned on global trade, labor law reform, Wisconsin rebellion, auto bailout, I could go on. Environmentalists, hydraulic fracturing, offshore deep water drilling, clean coal, I could go on. The resume of betrayal includes immigrants betrayed by a president who's actually increased the rate of deportation in this country over George W. Bush. Civil libertarians, do I even need to elaborate on that? Abandoned and betrayed. Even the mainstream press now with this incredible, beyond Nixon assault on the Associated Press, abandoned and betrayed. Disarmament advocates, nuclear disarmament advocates, abandoned and betrayed. The anti-war community. Last but not least, Black America. Betrayed by a black president, a technically black president, who has said and done less about racial equality than any U.S. chief executive in recent memory, as predicted by many of the folks here. Now, last October in the New York Times, Columbia University political scientist Frederick Harris offered some very interesting reflections on the last and all too rarely noted betrayal, the betrayal of Black America. Whether it ends in 2013 or 2017, Harris wrote, the Obama presidency has already marked the decline rather than the pinnacle of a political vision centered on challenging racial inequality. Mr. Obama, Harris continued, has had little to say on concerns specific to blacks. His State of the Union address in 2011 was the first by any president since 1948 not to mention poverty or the poor. Mr. Obama, in his first 2 years in office, talked less about race than any Democratic president had since 1961. From racial profiling to mass incarceration to affirmative action, his comments have been sparse and halting. And meanwhile, of course, Harris notes, the crisis of Black America not only continues, but actually deepens during the period of the first Black president who's talked about race less than any president since Eisenhower. And I'm not going to bother with the statistics right now, which are very depressing and which folks around here know. I will mention one that is too rarely mentioned, which is that 1 in 3 Black adult males in this country continues to carry the crippling lifelong stigma of a felony record, which is a barrier on all kinds of levels. And Obama knows about this very well and says less about felony record and ex-offenders and incarceration than George W. Bush said, even though he was the mandatory assigned to me keynote speaker as Illinois State Senator when I released a study on that very topic in Chicago at 45th and Michigan in 2002. And by the way, I just saw this citation in Henry Giroux's latest book. Michelle Alexander titled The Age of Obama as a Racial Nightmare. Time Dispatch, March 25th, 2012. You know, and during all of this, the black bourgeois so-called leadership class, like my former boss, James W. Compton, for many years on the south side of Chicago, is depressingly silent about both on the depth and the degree of the black crisis and on Obama's refusal to meaningfully address that crisis. And it's not just because Obama is a Democrat. That black political class, as Harris pointed out, had a lot more to say about the racial the silence and the racial oppression of Bill Clinton than it has about Obama. And that's because, despite what Chris Rock had to say, President Clinton actually was white. And Obama, for all his guess who's coming to dinner post-racial white friendliness, is technically black. The black political class has accepted the president's silence on race, Harris noted last October, quote, as the necessary price for the pride and satisfaction of having a black family in the White House. Now, I guess Dr. Harris has a book out on that price and the racial politics of the Obama era, and I ought to read it. I want to make 3 mostly friendly criticisms of his New York Times piece that I just quoted from. And my first criticism is simply that Obama, like Clinton, has been worse than merely silent on racial oppression. As I documented in my 2010 book, he's been openly hostile to the notion that he or anyone else in government ought to pay any special attention to blacks' needs. And this is, of course, very consistent with candidate Obama's instantly widely heralded Philadelphia race speech, which is basically dedicated to the proposition that Jeremiah Wright's anger at American racism was no longer appropriate in contemporary, supposedly post-racist, colorblind America, and with candidate Obama's just utterly ridiculous comment that black America's supposed post-civil rights Joshua generation had come 90% of the way to full equality, which is just an astonishing thing to say when we know that the wealth gap is one black dollar for every 20 white dollars. Now, just 3 weeks ago, Obama gave a commencement address at historically black Morehouse College, where he told young black men that, quote, there's no longer room for excuses, and that, quote, nobody cares if you suffered some discrimination. And then, quote, whatever you've gone through pales in comparison to the hardships previous generations endured and overcame. And he said all these things after citing his own ascendancy to the White House as an example that, quote, barriers have come tumbling down, end quote, new doors of opportunity have swung open. Now, can you imagine Barack Obama going to an all-female college and saying that about gender, or going to an all-Latino southwest side of Chicago high school and telling that to Latinos, telling nobody cares? And you know, 2 weeks ago I was up at Columbia because my son, who went to college because I worked at the Urban League, graduated Columbia Law. He's going to be a public defender. And I'd like to see Barack Obama have given that speech. That's one thing to say that at Morehouse, other because I was looking around, because I used to have to study this for the Urban League, and I was looking for black American people who were graduating from Columbia Law School, and I think I saw one in a crowd of 500. You got Harlem over here, and you got all right in Columbia, and you see the same exact drama enacted every year in the neighborhood I come from, in the south side of Chicago, where Obama used to teach law, where you've got Inglewood over here and Woodlawn over there, and the graduation, it's just, you know, 50% white and the rest Asian and other groups, and very few blacks. I'd love to see him try and give that speech at the Columbia or the Harvard or the Yale or the University of Chicago graduation. My second criticism maybe isn't really fair, because Harris isn't purporting to write about any other than racial politics. It's simply that Obama's racial identity, and I would add to this, his technically Muslim ethno-cultural nomenclature, right, the name, which was so critical for the rebranding of the U.S. empire after the Bush-Cheney nightmare in Iraq, that's been relevant not merely to the silencing of black elite dissent and to dissent regarding racism. It's also been relevant to the silencing of white and Latino and Asian dissent regarding the whole panoply of interrelated oppression structures, including class, capitalism, nationality, militarism, and, you know, the whole ball of ecocide and the whole ball of whack. And the third criticism I have is that I saw no recognition in Harris's essay of how a good cadre of us on the left, bigger than some might know, raised early, strident alarms about precisely the outcome he describes. We predicted it, warned against it, and much more regarding the Obama phenomena. And what many of us felt, I did early on, was almost an inevitability of an Obama presidency. We warned about it early on. Black Agenda Report, ZNet, Counterpunch, and various other venues. My own warnings date from 2 days after the Fleet Center keynote address by Obama. I maintain we've been living in the age of Obama since the keynote address in the summer of 2004, and they were developed in great deal in my subsequent volumes. I even spoke to a CNN reporter about how the age of Obama might very well, in fact probably would be, a disaster for the struggle against racial inequality and for much of black America in 2008. What did we know, those of us who warned early on from the actual left, about the counter-revolutionary, deeply conservative nature of an Obama presidency? I think we understood what John Pilger said in 2008, that while it might seem to be exciting in the land of chattel slavery to see a black family entering the White House, the pinnacle of power in the world's most powerful state, that race, like gender, like even class, we would have seen this as John Edwards, somehow crazy John Edwards got in the presidency. Remember this whole narrative about a mill worker's son, and it doesn't matter where you're from, you know, that these things can be tools of propaganda, and that what really matters at the end of the day is the class that you serve, what class you serve, or whatever color you might be, whatever class you might come from. We knew what W.E.B. Du Bois in his Marxist phase, and what the old American Communist Party, probably including Obama's alleged adolescent mentor Frank Davis, knew about race, which is that while it has a life of its own, it cannot be properly fully understood outside the critical context of class, rule, and empire. We knew that the predominantly white ruling class and imperial establishment played clever Machiavellian games with race and gender and ethnicity and religion and sexual orientation. Right now, all this, you know, we're opening up the right to kill, right, to gays and to females. That's a great progressive accomplishment. And they use these and other aspects of social identity as seductive propaganda tools to bamboozle, to use one of Malcolm X's favorite words, millions into seeing democratic transformation when the underlying reality is the deepening grip of the unelected and interrelated dictatorships of money and empire. We knew what Dr. King knew when he rejected efforts to enlist him for a presidential run in 1967. He wasn't interested. The Black Revolution, King wrote in '68, is exposing evils that are rooted in the whole structure of society, systemic rather than superficial flaws, and it suggests that the radical reconstruction of society itself is the real issue to be faced. We had a deep understanding of racism as a societal and institutional reality in terms of how labor markets work, how the criminal justice system works, how the real estate market works, right? Instead of a game with regard to the black or Latino or female faces and high places. And God knows we should have gotten a lot of that warning. Much of the left got that warning, even from the Bush administration, which was about as PC and multiracial in terms of its internal structure with Condi Rice and Colin Powell as any in recent memory. And it was also the most reactionary presidency in any memory. We can debate whether Obama's ending up actually in many ways being more reactionary. We knew that, as Howard Zinn used to say, the critical thing isn't who's sitting in the White House, it's who's sitting in the streets. If we're going to get a radical politics, including a black radical politics, and I'll tell you right now, flat out, if we don't get a radical politics back in this country, we're not going to have a decent and livable future, which I'm really happy is one of the basic themes of the Left Forum this year, because of the ecotastrophe that's sort of written into the DNA of capitalism, how it functions, thanks to people like Whirlpool and BP and Amoco and all the rest of that. We've got to get back, we've got to drop out of major party electoralism and bourgeois identity politics once and for all, right?
That's right.
We got to get back to old-fashioned Marxist and left black nationalist understandings of how race, racial identity, and sham electoral democracy function together within the overall interrelated context of capitalism and empire. And people, liberals go, well, you know, where there's still Obama, man. They go, is there anything good, decent racially about Obama? I can't listen anymore. I even got sucked into this early on. I can't listen anymore to all that role model stuff. I'm not sure this guy's any kind of role model for anybody. At this point, I'm not sure. I wouldn't prefer to see young African Americans in urban America prefer to see them being a Jordan or a Jay-Z or a Beyonce than dreaming of being an Obama or a Colin Powell or a Condi Rice / Susan Rice or a Cory Booker T.
All right.
So let's let him have his dreams of Mount Rushmore. Let's let him have his global foundation, his untold millions in corporate speaking fees, his Secret Service detachments. Let him send Sasha and Malia to the Deerfield Academy and Harvard, or maybe even Oxford.
Yeah.
And let him drone on. Obama likes to drone. He likes drones too. Let him drone on about how all that proves that equal opportunity has come to America for all those who refuse to make excuses. I know he's still got business to finish up for the ruling class, cutting back Social Security, Medicare, final Keystone approval, pipeline approval, that's a formality.
That's right.
Sneaking through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, look that up. Positioning the Pentagon more effectively to confront China. So yeah, we got to resist him and the ruling class he supports now every day. But we can already start to feel Obama, thank God, slipping under the bus of history. And that's a good thing. I don't think either Hillary Clinton or Mark Rubio, and certainly not Jeb Bush, can give this vicious socio-pathological empire a deadly rebranding to anything like the degree that Obama has done for the last few years. And you know, in the meantime, those of us on the actual left got bigger, better things to worry about than the life of times of what one Black Agenda Report commentator calls Booker T. Obama. We've got a bigger timeline than the 2- and 4-year election cycles of American politics, not to mention than the quarterly earnings statements time framework of capital. We're in pursuit of what Dr. King rightly called the real issue to be faced beyond superficial matters, the radical reconstruction of society itself. Thank you.
Hey there, good morning. It's almost not morning anymore. I'm Bruce Dixon. And I'm from Atlanta, Georgia nowadays, but I'm really from Chicago.
All right.
Hey, I ain't giving that up.
That's right.
And thank all of you for coming. And I got to thank all my colleagues here at Black Agenda Report and the contributors, and thank all of you, and thank some of the elders out here in this audience who laid a foundation for a lot of the good things that still happen and still can happen. Nellie Bailey gave me a little bit of undue credit, I think, at the beginning of this. She said that we understood, all of these people up here understood from the beginning what Obama was about. Well, you know what? I met him in 1992 when he was the state director of Project Go Illinois. And I was one of the 3 principal organizers. We registered 130-some thousand people to vote and flogged them out to the polls, put the first black woman in the U.S. Senate and all the rest of that. And the talk around Obama right after that was, by Christmas of 1992, was first open state Senate seat on the South Side, first open congressional seat on the South Side, a run for statewide office, and a run for national office. There's only 2 national offices. By the time he got into the state Senate, a year later, it began to slowly dawn upon us that, maybe he wasn't all that, but, who knew? So it sort of dawned gradually on a lot of us. So anyway, black politics at the tail end of the Obama era is going to be a time when organizing of any kind is going to be significantly more difficult because of the litter of knee-deep litter of broken promises that's going to be out here. A lot of the goodwill is going to be spent. President Obama likes to say that he stands on the shoulders of martyrs like Medgar Evers and Dr. King and the rest of this. And there are corrupt establishment historians like Brother Peniel Joseph who would have you believe that Barack Obama stands on the shoulders of Kwame Ture and Malcolm X and Ella Baker as well. In fact, he seems, as Mr. Street just said, to stand more on the shoulders of Colin Powell. And, at the end of the Obama era, what we're faced now is a left politics, a black politics that is content free. Our old friend Bill Fletcher, co-authored with Carl Davidson right before the last election a piece that ran in the Nation that said that we are obligated, progressives across the country are obligated to support President Obama despite his policies. So, but that's black politics, and white progressive politics. Please go ahead and sit there. I'm not sitting there. I'm obviously standing. White progressive politics take their lead from black politics a lot of times. So, as Glen said, if the black folks are confused, then the white progressives are going to confuse themselves too. That's right. That's just the way it is. So, at the end of the Obama era, at the tail end of the Obama era, there won't be much left of black politics. Mostly what we'll still have is the illustrious careers of our black elite in business, in politics, in entertainment. We'll have the unending celebration of those careers because the black elite is definitely good at blowing its own horn and celebrating itself. They can make a good thing out of a bad thing. Everybody's heard that that there is a black migration back to the South, and supposedly this black migration back to the South is so that people can take advantage of the fresh air and sunshine and, you know, better opportunities in the South. In fact, it's black families in the North who've been foreclosed upon and can't find jobs in New York and Chicago and can't find any place to live in Detroit to make a living, who are having to go back to Georgia and Mississippi and Tennessee and whatnot. Gotta find my place here. And of course, what we'll also have in black politics is we will have the ceaseless commemoration of the victories of the 1950s and the 1960s over Jim Crow, achieved by what the establishment likes to call the Civil Rights Movement, but which participants at the time usually described, am I wrong about this, as the Freedom Movement. We're going to have our black political elite, as we know it, sprang into existence only 40 and 45 years ago. They only sprang into existence when the Voting Rights Act began to be enforced in the North as well as the South. In 1968, 69, there were fewer than 10 black congressmen. Now, there are more than 40. But over their 40 and 45-year existence, the Andy Youngs, the Maynard Jacksons, the Tom Bradleys, the Michael Nutters, the Kasim Reeds, he's the mayor of Atlanta, and the John Conyers and the Charlie Rangels, whose political careers have spanned this whole period, haven't really brought black America very much in terms of results. I got on C-SPAN real quick as a caller and asked Randall Robinson if he could tell me what the top 3 things the black political class has accomplished for black people in the last 40 years. And he said, well, he said, well, we got the apartheid sanctions passed over Reagan's veto, and when Aristide was overthrown, me and Maxine and some folks, we flew to Africa and got him to come back. You know, it's like, well, you know, and that's the best he could do. Yeah. So, hey, but over the last 40 years, since this black political elite, and by the way, Obama doesn't stand alone. He would be impossible. He would be impossible without the rest of this black political class that I'm ashamed to say that I helped promote for years, and that many of us, you know, helped bring into existence and sustain over the last 4 decades. You know, so Obama doesn't stand alone. And when he goes, they'll still be with us. And his career will have encouraged a new cohort of them, you know, to come forth that we'll be dealing with for the foreseeable future. But anyway, on the watch of the current black political class, the prison state happened. In 1965, according to the Bureau of Prisons, in 1965, according to the Justice Department, whites were a majority in U.S. prisons. Now blacks are 12.5%, 13% of the population, and over 40% of the prisoners. Latinos are another quarter of the population, and they're 30%. So us and them put together, we're 1/4 of the population and 3/4 of the prisoners. And all this has happened on the watch of our current black political class. Gentrification is still the only model of urban economic development that anybody's come up with. There isn't any other. But we've got a black political class that is celebrating itself all the time, you know, and telling us what great things that they've achieved for us. Hey, you tell me. Real wages have not increased since 1970. And right now, the wage and wealth gap between, the wealth gap between blacks and whites is as big as it's ever been since we started measuring it. And even the good news is bad news. Like the good news that the wages of black women, relatively speaking, are rising, but really the only reason that they're rising is because the wages of men have fallen off a cliff. So, you know, so even the good news is bad news these days. So, turn the page here. That was 3. I got to go to 4. That was 4. Okay, here we go. So we're going to have a lot to do at the tail end of the age of Obama. And since I'm an organizer, I get to talk about what to do. We're going to have to rediscover electoral politics, I think. I mean, some people will say that we just need to forget about electoral politics. I would kind of disagree with that. I think that we need to rediscover electoral politics, not as what we call electoral fetishists, okay, who imagine that running people for office is the solution, and that, or who imagine that they're going to allow us to vote down gentrification, that they're going to allow us to vote against their wars and the rest of this. But back 4 decades ago in the Black Panther Party, we used a phrase that we used to call heightening the contradiction. There's a contradiction between people's expectations and what they're actually going to allow you to do. So if we're going to approach electoral politics, we've got to do it from an outside the box sort of perspective. We've got to approach it as practitioners who use the fact that people are listening in the run-up to elections. And so that even candidates for elected office are accorded a kind of unearned respect. I mean, how many of us have been in community meetings where an elected official or a candidate walks in the back of the room and the meeting stops and you call that person to the front of the room, okay, and give them something, and give them a minute to say something, and even when they say something that proves that they don't even know what the meeting is about, they're not even accorded as being a person with bad manners. You know, you might as well say your lordship. You know, that's the kind of deference we have even to candidates. I know people who've become candidates just to get a little of that love. I ain't gonna mention no names, okay? I ain't gonna mention no names. But if we're real and we're organizing for change, we've got to use that. We've got to use elections as a time when we can start real conversations with people that they're not otherwise going to have without us, okay? They talk about charter schools everywhere, but you know there's a word that they never use? What word is that? That's the P word, privatization, because the word polls badly. In focus groups, it's like, oh no, we don't like privatization, but we might like charter schools, you know? And so they said, well, these are public charter schools. Yeah, okay. You know, but so, so in Atlanta, I'm a state committee member of the Green Party. We basically took over the Green Party. The Green Party in Georgia was a bus by the side of the road with the keys under the seat and the title in the glove compartment. So we took it, okay? We took it. And, say what you want about the historic Green Party. The structure of the Green Party is such that in your state, you can do anything you want to do if you take it over. Okay, so we're taking it over. We've done that. And anyway, we can use the elections to put out people to hold real conversations in front of real people, to bring real messages that folks haven't had.
Yes.
We can tell people that privatization is a choice and a bad choice, not an economic and historical necessity. We can have the conversation that gentrification, and unjust war, and environmental destruction, in which the poor always feel first, are also choices that other people are making for us, not things that just have to happen, that we have to accommodate ourselves to. At the tail end of the Obama era, we're going to have to redefine our own idea of what nonprofit, voluntary, and civic organizations are. We're going to have to, even churches, and we're going to have to finger organizations based on who funds them.
That's right.
Okay? Right. The old model of all your civil rights organizations, ask Mr. Pinckney here, he can tell you, okay? The NAACP, the National Association of Black State Legislatures, the CBC, all of them have what they call a corporate roundtable, okay? And the corporate roundtable means you give us $25,000 or $50,000 and send a black executive over here, and you get to write our position papers.
Yeah.
And go on retreats with our leaders.
Yeah.
Okay? And so we got to redefine what this means. The foundation complex that funds a lot of our organizations, a lot of our community organizations, is deeply, deeply, deeply tied to the political establishment. Absolutely tied. I'm 60-some years old. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I used to hang out in the Blackstone Public Library. Okay, if anybody knows where that is. Those libraries were built by Andy Carnegie after he, raped the world and made billions of dollars and the rest of this. But nowadays, billionaires don't even do that. Okay, what they do is they make foundations that explore further business interests. So Bill Gates made a foundation that is going to has been pushing the privatization of education and the privatization of agricultural technology, so that every African and Asian farmer who plants rice and maize is going to have to pay Bill Gates and his friends. So we've got to redefine what our organizations are, what our voluntary and civic organizations are, and what they do. We're going to have to reclaim our will to defy unjust authority, which we will have lost, as Glen Ford pointed out last year in the speech he made. He said that the movement only lasted 8 years, and in our day we looked up to folks who defied authority. Now young people are going to be coming up now, and the only examples in front of them are subservience to authority. So how's that going to play? We're going to have to let go of top-down, patriarchal, backward leadership models like the black church. Sorry.
Say it. Say it.
And we're going to have to let go of the Democratic Party.
Say it. Say it. All right. All right.
There's, all praise to Chokwe Lumumba and the brothers and sisters who did what they did there. We'll see how that turns out in Jackson, Mississippi. We'll see. And we'll even have to let go of models of activism that want to wait around and take advantage of some big media event like Trayvon Martin or Troy Davis or Gina to turn out big crowds, and then thinking that we can use this big crowd that turns out for something. Well, you know what? If the media turned out that big crowd, then they're going to put Al Sharpton and Ben Jealous at the end of the thing.
That's right.
And you're not going to get to take attendance. There was a 1 Million Man March 20 years ago. Did they take attendance there? Was there a 1 Million Man mailing list after that? Anybody? Never happened. Okay? So that's the model. And we're going to have to let go of that. We're just going to have to let go of that. We're going to have to let go of the idea that we can come up with some creative act or persuasive argument that's going to give us media access to galvanize some huge number of people in some short period of time. That's not going to happen. Maybe it happened before. Maybe you think it happened before. I don't know. But even if it did happen 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, they're smarter now than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. They've learned. Okay? Just like we all learn. The other guys learn too. We're not going, by and large, to be able to take advantage of the media. There's one little exception. Anybody here heard of low power radio?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a low power. You can get your own radio station. Okay. If you got a not-for-profit organization that's got roots, go to Prometheus.org. No, PrometheusRadio.org. The licenses are going to be let sometime in October. So if you got a local organization, you want your own radio station. What kind of organizing could you do with your own radio station?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah.
So PrometheusRadio.org, and we're going to run whatever we can on Black Agenda Report about it as well. E, F. Where's F? I got my notes here. E, F, G. Okay, well I don't see F, so I'll just go to G. What the heck? We're gonna have to rediscover how to organize and what our standards are for organization. If you want to do some organizing in your community around mass incarceration, okay, and you've got $5,000 or $6,000 in your hand to kick this off, what are you going to do? You're going to invite Michelle Alexander to come speak and raise awareness? Well, you know what? Michelle Alexander charges, I think, the last I heard, I may be wrong, $5,000. $4,000? More than that?
It's 5 to 10 at Riverside. It's 5.
Depends on,
Yeah, I think she'll come out for 5.
yeah.
And I'm sure she's worth every penny of it. But if I had $5,000 in my hand to do organizing with, here's what I would do. For $2,500 to $2,800, you can get a photocopier that will run you 1,000,000 copies before it needs a major overhaul. And for $200 a month, $200 or $300 a month, depending, you can get a service contract on it. So that every time something don't work, you can call a guy and he'll be out here in an hour to fix it. Some service contracts, if you get a $400 service contract a month, sometimes they include all the paper you can eat.
Yeah.
Okay? So if I had $5,000 or $10,000 and I'm organizing, I think, you know, and I've got a choice between calling in Michelle Alexander and, you know, having my own photocopier that I can run 1,000,000 pieces of paper through to hand out in front of courthouses or in front of public schools or in front of Social Security offices. What am I going to do? You figure it out. But we're going to have to rediscover that.
That's right.
We're going to have to rediscover that because right now we're stuck in the raising awareness kind of model, you know, for GH. Oh, we already said that. We skipped right over that. Excellent. Yeah, so if you're a so-called leftist organization in some major or medium-sized city and you don't have a mailing list and a phone list where you're talking to 10 or 15,000 people and sending them out emails every 2 weeks and calling meetings every month or so, there's just no excuse for that. Okay? Get your $5,000, get a photocopier, get where the people are. Oh, and on this leadership models, we're going to have to kick those old patriarchal leadership models out. I forgot this point. And build organizations and build organizations and processes. Use your meetings to build organizations and processes that the people who are most concerned with that issue can take control of and take ownership of. There's no reason in the world why you should have organizations dealing with mass incarceration that are not going to be led by the families of prisoners. Okay? There's no reason in the world that you should have organizations dealing with public education that aren't led by teachers and parents and that have participation from students. No reason in the world you can't do that. We're almost finished here. H. Oh yeah, we are finished indeed. We'll even have to give up the idea of a new civil rights movement to fight the new Jim Crow. Because when you really think about it, Glen talked earlier about the marvelous cohesion of the black community a generation ago to achieve its political objectives. Well, you know what? We can't duplicate that anymore because Jim Crow affected all black folks, if you were rich or not rich. Okay? Now, the prison state doesn't lock up well-to-do black people.
That's right.
Okay? And you know, Michelle Alexander, who, you know, bless her heart, she pointed out, she said that if we rolled back the incarceration levels to 1980, well, we not only have to let 1,000,000 people go, but there'd be 1,000,000 folks out of work too.
Yeah.
And a lot of it would be black.
Yeah.
A lot of it would be black. In Georgia, where I'm at, most of the prison guards are black. I guarantee you. Cook County Jail in Chicago, most of the prison guards are black. I ain't been to Rikers Island, but hey, you tell me. All right. Time. All right. Well then, I'm good. So that I invite you to. So Obama can stand on the shoulders of the people he stands on. We need to stand on the shoulders of the people we need to stand on, and I hope you can go back to where you came from and help build a real politics based on what people really want. Thank you.
All right, good job.
Thank you, everyone. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and I would just caution everyone, because of the time factor, if you not get into making long statements, if you have a question, I mean, we could meet in the outdoor courtroom around lunchtime. but let's please try to have some discipline so everyone can ask a question or make a short statement. So what we're going to do, we're going to take 3 speakers, and then we'll stop, let the panel respond, and then we will continue after that. So, the first 3 hands. Okay, I'm going to try to get across the room here. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. You, sir.
What can we do about voter suppression that's going on today?
Okay. What can we do about voter suppression that is going on today? Number 2 speaker question. Who is number 2 over here?
Yeah, just the question of Cornell West.
Could you stand up a
Oh, yes,
little
sir.
bit just to project?
Yeah,
please?
just the question of Cornell West, because a lot of the panelists dealt with the kind of role that Malcolm X played in critiquing the reformists inside the Democratic Party and the Civil Rights Movement. The role that Tavis Smiley and Cornell West play also. Criticism, but also at the same time even urging people to vote for him in the 2012 election, so they can deal with that a little bit, because I think he's an enigma.
Okay, so the schizophrenic approach they are independent of supporting Barack Obama, but in fact they criticize him but continue that support, which of course was the position of Bill Fletcher yesterday. Okay, so we have that, voter suppression and that, and the third?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief, 3 sentences.
You will have to be brief.
I'm Jackie DeSalvo. I am a domestic terrorist, according to the FBI's Freedom of Information revelations about Occupy Wall Street. You're probably being surveilled.
Excuse me, ask the question. We don't have a lot of time.
Okay,
Let's be
here's my
fair.
question. I want to know, what is the Black organizational agenda? Is there one? There is an agenda some of us are working on here, which is to rebuild Occupy Wall Street around as a multiracial, pro-working class, outreach-oriented organization, fighting the 1% on people's demands.
Okay,
And I want to know what the agenda is, the organizational agenda is, and whether we can cooperate on the kind of agenda, and that this group is not only multiracial, but Black-led.
Okay, all right, so the final question, whether or not it's possible, no, number 1, what is the Black agenda, and does the Black agenda allow for a collaboration with Occupy Wall Street, multiracial organization, and is Black-led? So we have those 3 questions. Shall we start with whomever? Who wants to be first? Margaret.
For which question?
One, whatever you want to
Okay,
answer.
just on the question of individuals, whoever they may be, who critique Obama or the Democrats, but then when push comes to shove, still urge support and votes for them. I think we have to be honest about who we're going to listen to and who we're not going to listen to, or about what those individuals may say. I mean, I guess no one is perfect. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or any of these individuals out with the bathwater, but there's no reason for us here to feel obliged to go along with any individual and everything that they say. We should not change what we have to say. I didn't vote for Obama in 2008 or 2012, and I don't care who else said that I should or said that they would. So I think it's just important for us to have our own agenda, have our own strategy, to state it very clearly, and then we can always say that we don't agree with a particular individual on a particular issue. But that should not stop anyone here.
Okay.
Yeah, on voter suppression, hey, I worked with Barack Obama on a voter registration drive where I was one of the chief organizers and he was the state director. He knew at the time that by the time he got to the U.S. Senate, he did make a remark that if we did the same things that, no, he said that we couldn't conduct a voter registration drive the same way we did years ago. In fact, at one point I remember during the voter registration drive, I mean, I was turning in, boxes and carloads of registrations every day. I mean every week. But at one point, I had a flat tire, and I went to the bottom of my trunk, and I found 2 registration cards that had worked their way under there that had been filled out a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago. I went and turned them in, and the people behind the counter said, "Come on, you should turn these in on time." I know, I'm sorry. And those people were registered. Now, the state of Florida, for one, but many other states, make a felony, a separate felony for each one of those that don't get turned in within 40 hours or something. They've been passing laws like that ever since the 90s. Brother Obama and the Democrats could have spoken out about that, as soon as they got in office in 2008. They could have been rolling, the Democrats controlled the Congress for 2 terms of from 07 to the end of 2010. They could have rolled a bunch of that back then. So a lot of their concern about voter suppression is late and hypocritical and even phony. Okay, but at best late. So do what you can. Do what you can, and definitely expose the vacillation of these Democrats who really don't care about it until it's 2 months before the election, when it really doesn't mean nothing.
Thank you,
Black
Bruce.
agenda, pick one and get to work. There's a lot of room. If you want to do something, do it. Nobody's stopping you.
I just wanted to chime in that voter suppression is intimately related to the felony marking issue. There's 13 states that deny voting rights for life, and that whole thing that in 2000, that cleansing of the voting rolls, particularly the black rolls, is very much under the pretext of getting felons. And for those of you, I voted for Nader in what was supposed to be a contested state in 08, and Jill Stein again in what was supposed to be a contested state. People who tell you that vote for Nader brought us the Bush era. Racial disenfranchisement for life of felons and the racist voter suppression did a hell of a lot more to put George W. Bush in 2000 than anything else.
Tony?
Let me hold on.
Okay, Glen. All right, so more hands. 1, 2. Anyone else over here? 1, 2. Come on, ladies. Oh, sorry. Oh, 3. Okay. Still looking at you, ladies. Raise those hands. Okay, so we have the order. 1, 2, 3. Please, would you proceed?
Okay. Well, I want Professor, how you pronounce it, Monteiro, advice to like young intellectuals navigating the social sciences on an academic level. What's your advice to that? Because I've confronted some of those barriers that you spoke about.
Question to Tony. How would you advise really young people coming into the movement? You, sir?
I'm looking for a theory about classic race. What I mean by that is,
Could you stand up, please, and project a bit?
I'm sorry. I'm looking for a theory about class and race, and the reason is because I'm trying to think about what it means, what affirmative action and various types of talent searches, national kind of official, professional talent searches, what that means for the black community in terms of class identity as well as class consciousness. So what does it mean for someone from the hood to do decent in school, then have certain diversity initiatives pull them into a different class? What does that mean for black people? Yeah.
Okay. Well, at least we do know that he's not talking about Barack Obama's thesis or theory that young black people who speak proper English, whatever the hell that means, are considered white by their classmates, and that's a bad thing. So we know that that's a myth. So it's not that. I'm just throwing that in as a gratuitous reminder of the worst of Barack Obama. Say who?
As I be standing here, I just want to say, you can go to, and I'm going to ask my question, Oliver Cox, Race, Class, and Caste.
Yes.
And 1958, Black Bourgeoisie, E. Franklin Frazier. Okay. My question, quickly, Are we going to see this on YouTube so I can analyze the whole thing?
Absolutely.
Not a
You
problem.
ahead of me. I was going to announce that.
Okay. My question is, can anybody, I was just in Atlanta last November, and northeast of Atlanta, this place called Edgewood, right? Black people are being gentrified by a black administration. Could someone speak to that?
Oh, okay. And then just as a quick add-on to that, I will speak quickly on the black misleadership class role in the gentrification of Harlem, the most historic, world-renowned African-American community that has lost 10 to 12% of its population, according to the last census. And that's just typical of so many other communities.
Yeah.
So let's just start here.
Sign-in sheet.
Yeah, the sign-in sheet is going around.
So anybody who has it, we'd love to know. I mean, it's a crime for an organizer to have more than 3 people and not get all the names.
That's right.
Okay, and if we can just remember on the sign-in sheet, please print. I mean, we don't, you know, you have to go like, is that an E or an A? So please print so that we'll have that. All right, so we just finished the last 3 set of questions, answers from the panelists.
Can I address this question that he asked me? I do think that we need a new cadre of black social scientists to create a new type of social science, what I would call a radical or revolutionary social science, and by which I mean an ideologically oriented, partisan to the black proletariat social science, which has as its objective the radical restructuring of this society and the ending of war and injustice, period. Now, that's the opposite of the type of academic, especially black academic, who is being produced, which is the opposite of what all of us thought the Black Academy would be as a result of the Black Studies movement. So we need an insurgent black social science. And I would just say one other thing. We need more than academics and social scientists. We need real intellectuals who are able to grasp the necessity of theory. Because we do not, in my opinion, have an adequate theory to explain the movement forward. And in this respect, we, all of us, have abandoned the ideological front too often to the social democrats and the liberals. And they predominate in most academic departments, and most blacks, especially when you go to the elite places, are this. The problem of Cornell West, quickly, the problem of Cornell West, on the one side, we have to give Cornell a great deal of credit because he has been viciously and ruthlessly attacked by his former allies in the elite black and white academy. He found himself in a position, and this is every person who moves primarily as an individual. You understand what I'm saying? There's so much pressure, and you don't know who has your back. And that's the position that he finds himself in. I think Cornell is a real asset in our struggle at this time. But not enough, you know.
Okay, let's start with one of the panelists who has an answer, Glen, and then Paul, and then Margaret and Bruce.
Jose was speaking of gentrification in some town called Edgewater, north of Atlanta, under a black administration. Gentrification is going on under black administrations wherever there is a black administration.
That's right.
The gentrification in New Orleans, all of the housing projects have been destroyed, and without resistance from many parts of the black community and by a black administration in Newark, New Jersey, public housing. And we can go all across the country, and we see that that's the case. As Bruce Dixon said, gentrification is the only model for urban development.
Exactly.
And we don't, our organizations don't put forward an idea of what development should look like. First of all, we should not accept anything, any scheme as development that does not serve the needs of the people who already live in the city. If that is not a fundamental definition of development, then what we will see is the replacement of the people in the city with a new population.
That's right.
And that's gentrification. I wrote a multi-part series in the Black Commentator days called How to Build a Black City. And it basically advocated and that flying squads of experts and organizers go into various communities and find out what the people in these communities think these communities need. In other words, get communities, which I believe that folks do city planning on their own. People who walk down the street in their neighborhood say, ought to be a store here, ought to be a nightclub here, ought to be this, ought to be that. But they have no idea that their wishes for what should be in their community have any chance of bearing fruit. And so that's an education and skills kind of project to bring in folks who are urban planners and people who are organizers, and get the people of the community to speak up for what kind of assets they would like to see, what is needed there. And I think that's the way that one combats gentrification, which is the corporate plan for the city. You get a people's plan for the city. And everybody has an idea about what their neighborhoods need. They just have to be given reason to think that their ideas count.
Right, I'm going to interject here just for a quick minute. I'm going to talk about historic Harlem. Harlem's Main Street, 125th Street, Martin Luther King Boulevard, is the target of corporatization and redevelopment from the Hudson River to the East River. Mayor Bloomberg wants to bring in 1 million new residents here in New York City. Manhattan is the international center for finance capital. We don't need to know that. Even the New York Times has admitted in bold print that the plutocracy here in New York City is moving toward a whiter New York City, a whiter shade of Harlem. So the biggest communities that you're confronted with in this task is that of historic black communities, none more so than Harlem. So how do you do it? Columbia University is in the Eastern Corridor, $6 billion, 18 acres, extension of their 116th Street campus, $6 billion to be developed over a 30-year period, although Lee Bollinger, who's the president of Columbia University, comes out of the University of Michigan as a liberal. He is, in fact, chair of the board of directors of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. That's what he is. Barack Obama went to Columbia University. Nobody knows what he did there, but he went to Columbia University. The Obama administration is supporting Columbia University in its expansion. So is Congressman Charles Rangel. And the Eastern Corridor, Mayor Bloomberg, and this is a real estate town. There isn't a deal that Mayor Bloomberg hasn't been a part of in terms of major real estate development. In East Harlem, they're going to put up luxury housing. As a matter of fact, along the 125th corridor, they're going to have about 45 units of luxury housing, 2 hotels, a banquet room, anything you name, but it will not be for the local folks. All of the major corporations are there. Red Lobster, there have been some federal lawsuits in terms of how they protect their workers, how they not protect their workers, how they exploit their workers. Every major apparel retail store is now on 125th Street or along the boulevards, St. Nicholas Avenue, to the shame of New York City's powerful real estate industry. A swath of that corridor is called the Gold Coast. Now, why? I know everybody got that one, the Gold Coast. That's what they called it because it has the most luxury development than any other commercial corridor, north or south in Harlem. That's what you have. But one of the things that we predicted many, many years ago, about 20 years ago, is that the politicians would in fact be instrumental in their own undoing. Because in the 34th Congressional District, that was in fact created because of Adam Clayton Powell Jr., because there wasn't any black representation. That district is now lost to African Americans. African Americans lost 10,000 or more of its population, and this is Central Harlem as distinguished from West Harlem, which is much more ethnically diverse, and East Harlem, which is Spaha, Spanish Harlem, Spaha. Noha is north of Harlem. South Ha is south of Harlem. And so there you have, now remember, the medium income in Central Harlem, which is Black Harlem, is only about $28,000. And very quickly, Barack Obama, showing his total disconnect from the African American community, came to Central Harlem for a $38,000 plate dinner. We held a demonstration against him, much to the chagrin of the Harlem Miss Leadership class. He came to the Apollo Theater and had black women and men zooning, sort of swooning when he did an Al Green imitation. We were outside protesting against him for his sneaky passage of the National Defense Authorization Act that the left media, including Amy Goodman, refused to cover. So when people talk about the critics or opponents of Barack Obama's policies, not the man, I don't care what kind of suit he wears. I'm not going to eat dinner with him. But the point is that there is local grassroots actions that we started even in 2007 when I first met Glen Ford. We had a series of community forums where we laid out what Obama mania was all about, and that was nothing more than hype. So I thank you for that. Let's move on to other, I think we have time up. Oh, it's time up. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Good job. Good job.
Would you please sign in? And I hope that the bidding